Imagine a time not so long ago, America, a land of dreams. But for millions it was a nightmare. Slavery was the law. Human beings were bought and sold like horses or like cotton. This was the chilling reality, a deep, dark stain on the nation. The economy, especially in the South, depended on it. Life for an enslaved person was so hard, working in fields day after day, under the burning sun or in grand houses unseen, always with fear in your heart. Fear of the whip, fear of being sold, families torn apart, no basic rights, no voice, no freedom, a nation promising freedom yet practicing bondage. But even in the darkest night, a star can shine. Enslaved people fought back, in ways big and ways small. Some ran away, seeking the North Star. Some whispered songs of freedom. They held on to their culture, their stories, their dignity. They kept humanity alive, in the face of unimaginable inhumanity. And then, other voices began to speak, people of faith, like the Quakers. They started to ask hard questions. Is this right? Is this what God wants? They believed everyone was equal. These were some of the first abolitionists, brave souls, swimming against a strong tide. Their conscience would not let them rest. Speaking out against slavery was dangerous, but they began to organize. Let's talk about some of these early heroes, people you might not know, but people who lit the first candles. Benjamin Lay, a Quaker, so passionate. He used dramatic acts to show slavery's evil. John Woolman, who traveled far, urging people to free their slaves. Anthony Benezet, a teacher, he wrote books, started schools for black children. They knew in their hearts slavery was wrong. They laid important groundwork. And we must honor the early black abolitionists. Their voices were so powerful, because they spoke from experience. Prince Hall, a leader in Boston, he fought for rights for education. Absalom Jones and Richard Allen, they founded the first black churches, places of strength, of community, of resistance. Imagine their courage. Section 4, Unstoppable Courage, Faces of the Fierce Fight. Then came a man, a true fire starter, William Lloyd Garrison. He started a newspaper, The Liberator, and his words, they were like flames. He didn't want gradual change. He demanded freedom now, immediate emancipation for all, no compromise, no excuses. He was called radical, dangerous, but he woke people up, that's for sure. And then there was Frederick Douglass, a man who escaped the horrors of slavery. He taught himself to read and write, and he became one of the greatest speakers, one of the most powerful writers ever. When he spoke, people were moved to tears. He told his story, slavery's brutal truth. His words exposed the hypocrisy of a nation that preached freedom, while enslaving millions. His voice was a roar, and we cannot forget Sojourner Truth. Section 5, Shaking the Foundations, A Nation Divided. The early 19th century was a time of great turmoil and division in the United States. The nation was grappling with its identity, torn between two very different ways of life. On one side, the industrial North, with its growing cities and factories. On the other, the agrarian South, deeply rooted in the institution of slavery. As these voices grew stronger, so did the tension. The debates in town halls and public squares became more heated, reflecting the growing divide. People were no longer just discussing policies, they were questioning the very soul of the nation. The country was splitting in two, North against South, freedom against slavery. The lines were drawn, not just on maps, but in the hearts and minds of the people. Families were divided, friendships were tested, and the nation stood on the brink of an unprecedented conflict. Every new piece of land, every new law, each decision about the expansion of territories brought the issue of slavery to the forefront. Would these new lands be free or slaveholding? The stakes were incredibly high. It became a fight over this one issue. The question of slavery overshadowed all other political debates. It was a moral, economic, and social battleground that no one could ignore. Would slavery expand, or would it end? The future of millions of enslaved people hung in the balance. The abolitionist movement gained momentum, and the voices calling for the end of slavery grew louder and more insistent. The air was thick with anger. Protests and rallies became common, and the streets were filled with people demanding change. The tension was palpable, and it seemed like the nation was a powder keg ready to explode. You could feel the ground trembling. The very foundation of the country was shaking under the weight of this monumental issue. Newspapers were filled with headlines about slavery, and the public was more engaged than ever before. The nation was on a collision course. Something had to give. Political leaders were in constant debate, and it was clear that a resolution was needed. But what form would it take? Would it be peaceful, or would it lead to something far more destructive? Then came laws like the Fugitive Slave Act. This law was cruel. It mandated that escaped slaves, even those who had reached free states, could be captured and returned to their enslavers. It was a stark reminder of the lengths to which the South would go to protect slavery. It meant that, even in free states, No place was truly safe for those who had escaped the bonds of slavery. The law turned every citizen into a potential enforcer of this brutal system. People who had escaped slavery could be caught. The fear and uncertainty for escaped slaves were immense. They lived with the constant threat of being torn from their newfound freedom and dragged back into a life of bondage and dragged back to bondage. The sight of captured slaves in chains was a grim reminder of the harsh realities of the time. Slave auctions continued, and the human cost of this institution was laid bare for all to see. It forced everyone to take a side. Northerners were outraged, many who were neutral. The Fugitive Slave Act galvanized public opinion in the North. People who had previously been indifferent or neutral on the issue of slavery now felt compelled to take a stand. Now felt they had to act. Abolitionist meetings and protests grew in number and intensity. The movement to end slavery was no longer a fringe cause. It was becoming a central issue in American life. It showed how desperate the South was. The South's actions revealed their desperation to maintain their way of life. They saw the abolitionist movement as an existential threat to their economic and social order. To protect its evil institution, the defense of slavery became more fervent and aggressive. Southern leaders and plantation owners were willing to go to great lengths to protect their interests, and the violence started to flare up. Clashes between abolitionists and pro-slavery forces became more frequent and violent. The nation was inching closer to a breaking point, and the question remained, how long could this fragile union hold? Section 6, the price of freedom, war and emancipation, and so the war came. The Civil War, brother against brother, American against American. It was a conflict that would define a nation and change the course of history forever. It was a terrible, bloody conflict. The fields were soaked with the blood of young men, and the air was thick with the smoke of battle. The nation was torn apart. Millions fought, hundreds of thousands died. The cost was unimaginable, the loss incalculable. Families were shattered, communities destroyed. What were they fighting for? What drove these men to such lengths, to such sacrifice? The answer lies in the very fabric of the nation. At its very heart, it was about slavery, the institution that had stained the nation's soul for centuries. The South fought to preserve it, to maintain their way of life built on the backs of enslaved people. The South fought to keep it. They believed in their cause, in their right to own other human beings. It was a belief that would lead to their downfall. The North at first fought to save the Union, to keep the country whole. But as the war dragged on, the purpose evolved. It became a fight for freedom, for justice. But the war would change everything. The Battle of Gettysburg, a turning point, showed the world that the Union could and would prevail. It was a sign of hope amidst the darkness. This was the awful price, the devastation, the destruction, the countless lives lost. It was the cost of holding on to injustice for so long. For holding on to injustice for so long, the nation paid dearly for its sins, but out of the ashes, a new hope emerged. And who stepped up to fight for freedom? Black soldiers, that's who. They saw the war as a chance to claim their rightful place in society, to fight for their own liberation. Nearly 200,000 brave men. They joined the ranks of the Union Army, ready to lay down their lives for a cause greater than themselves. Many of them former slaves. They had known the whip, the chain, the auction block. Now, they would know the rifle, the uniform, the battlefield. They joined the Union Army. They marched, they trained, they fought. They proved their mettle in the heat of battle. They fought with courage and skill. They faced not only the enemy, but also prejudice and discrimination within their own ranks. They wanted to destroy slavery. They wanted to see the end of the institution that had oppressed them and their ancestors for generations. They wanted to prove their worth, to show that they were just as capable, just as brave, just as deserving of freedom as any other man. Their right to be free citizens. And they did. Oh, they truly did. Through their valor and sacrifice, they earned their place in history. They were heroes, every single one. Their legacy lives on, a testament to the power of courage, determination, and the unyielding quest for freedom. Section 7, the echoes of abolition, a legacy that lives on. But the end of slavery, that wasn't the end of the story. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter in the long and arduous journey toward true equality and justice for all. Oh no, the fight was far from over. The Civil War may have ended, but the battle for civil rights and human dignity was just heating up. The period called Reconstruction began. It was a time of great promise and potential, a time when the nation had the chance to rebuild itself on the principles of equality and justice, a time of hope, a time of rebuilding. Freedmen and women took their first steps into a new world, one where they could finally claim their rights and build their futures, a chance to create a new South, a truly equal nation. Communities came together, schools were built, and the seeds of a more inclusive society were sown. But there were so many challenges, so much hate. The forces of racism and oppression were not easily defeated, and they fought back with a vengeance. The struggle for real equality, it was a battle fought in the streets, in the courts, and in the hearts and minds of the American people. For black citizens to have their full rights, to be recognized as equal under the law and in society. This was a fight that required immense courage and resilience. That struggle would continue for generations. The Jim Crow laws, segregation, and systemic discrimination were formidable obstacles that took decades to dismantle. Freedom was won, but justice? That takes longer. The journey toward true equality is ongoing, and each generation must take up the mantle. But what the abolitionist movement gave us, it provided a foundation, a starting point for all the progress that would follow, is a legacy that still shines brightly. Their courage and determination continue to inspire new generations of activists and leaders. It showed us the power of courage, the power of standing up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the power of a few brave voices, voices that spoke out against injustice and called for a better, fairer world. Speaking truth even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. These individuals risked everything to fight for freedom and equality. It showed that ordinary people from all walks of life could come together to make extraordinary changes, can come together and change the world. They laid the foundation. Their efforts paved the way for the civil rights movements that would follow, for all the civil rights battles to come. Their spirit lives on. The legacy of the abolitionists is a testament to the enduring power of justice and equality.